Daniel Carter had always been a man of curiosity. His small antique shop in the quiet town of Maplewood, New York, was more than just a business. It was his sanctuary. Every dusty shelf and cluttered corner held pieces of history waiting to be discovered. Daniel spent most of his days sifting through old boxes at estate sales, flea markets, and forgotten attics, searching for treasures that others overlooked. It wasn't about money for him. It was about the thrill of uncovering something unique, something with a story. On this particular Saturday morning, Daniel found himself wandering through the remnants of an old estate sale on the outskirts of town. The house had belonged to an elderly woman who had recently passed away, leaving behind decades of accumulated belongings. Most of the items were ordinary. Faded photographs, mismatched china, stacks of yellowed newspapers. But one object caught Daniel's eye almost immediately. Sitting atop a rickety wooden table near the back of the room was a peculiar golden seal. The seal was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. It was about the size of his palm, perfectly round, and intricately carved with symbols that seemed both alien and ancient. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each line and curve etched with precision. What intrigued him most, though, was the faint warmth radiating from the metal when he picked it up. It felt alive, as if it carried some kind of energy within it. Daniel turned it over in his hands, examining every detail. There was no price tag attached, which made him wonder if anyone else had even noticed it. "Finders keepers," he muttered under his breath, slipping the seal into his coat pocket before anyone could object. He didn't feel guilty about taking it, not really. After all, it wasn't like anyone else seemed interested. Besides, Daniel reasoned, he would pay the estate's executor later, once he figured out what the thing actually was. That evening, after closing up the shop, Daniel settled into his workshop, a cramped space behind the store filled with tools, books, and half-finished projects. He placed the seal on his workbench and switched on a bright desk lamp, casting sharp shadows across its surface. The symbols glinted softly in the light, almost as if they were shifting slightly beneath his gaze. Shaking off the strange sensation, Daniel reached for a magnifying glass to get a closer look. As he leaned forward, the air around him seemed to grow heavier, pressing against his skin like an invisible weight. At first, he thought it was just fatigue catching up with him. He'd been on his feet all day. But then a voice cut through the silence, low and resonant, sending chills down his spine. "You have removed my royal seal." Daniel froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he glanced around the room, searching for the source of the voice. No one was there. Just him, the seal, and the hum of the overhead bulb. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself, trying to shake off the unease building inside him. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe he needed more sleep. But the voice spoke again, clearer this time. "I am Kalen. You have released me, human, and now our fates are intertwined." Daniel's eyes darted back to the seal. It sat innocently on the table, unmoving, yet somehow he couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him. What do you mean?" he stammered, gripping the edge of the bench for support. There was a pause, as if the voice, or whatever it was considering how to respond. When it finally spoke, its tone was calm but firm. "For centuries, I have been bound within this seal by royal decree. By removing it, you have broken that binding. Now, I am free, but not entirely. Our lives are connected until death claims one of us." Daniel let out a nervous laugh, running a hand through his hair. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Or maybe he was losing his mind. "Okay, Kalen, was it? Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm pretty sure I didn't sign up for any supernatural bonds or whatever you're talking about." "I assure you this is no jest," the voice replied. "You may choose to ignore me, but the truth remains. We are linked now, whether you wish it or not." Despite his skepticism, Daniel couldn't deny the chill creeping up his spine. The voice sounded real, too real to dismiss outright. Still, he decided to play along, if only to humor himself. "All right, fine. Let's say I believe you. Who, or what, are you exactly?" "I was once a guardian prince of my people. the voice explained. We protected the boundaries between worlds, sealing away threats that sought to disrupt the balance. This seal was my anchor, my prison, and my duty. Now that it has been disturbed, those barriers weaken and danger looms. Daniel frowned, leaning back in his chair. Danger? What kind of danger? Before the voice could answer, a sudden gust of wind swept through the workshop, extinguishing the lamp and plunging the room into darkness. Daniel fumbled for the flashlight he kept nearby, his pulse racing. As the beam of light illuminated the space, he noticed something odd. The seal was glowing faintly, pulsing with a soft golden hue. Do not underestimate the consequences of your actions, the voice warned. The Veilborn will come, and when they do, you will need me. The Veilborn? Daniel echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. But there was no reply. The room fell silent once more, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and the glowing seal. For a long moment he simply stared at it, his mind racing with questions. Was this some elaborate hallucination? A trick of the light? Or was it something far stranger, something beyond comprehension? Whatever the truth might be, one thing was certain. Daniel's life had just taken a turn into uncharted territory. The next morning, Daniel woke up groggy and disoriented. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in his blinds, painting streaks of gold across the cluttered floor of his apartment above the shop. For a moment, he wondered if the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a dream, a vivid, unsettling dream brought on by too much coffee and not enough sleep. But when he stumbled into the kitchen to make breakfast, he realized it wasn't. Standing near the counter, inspecting a loaf of bread as if it were some kind of ancient relic, was Kalen. Or at least that's what Daniel assumed this man called himself. He looked completely solid now, no longer just a disembodied voice. His features were sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and piercing eyes that shimmered faintly, like sunlight reflecting off water. His clothes were strange, dark flowing garments that seemed out of place in the modern world. But they fit him perfectly, accentuating his tall, imposing frame. Daniel froze in the doorway, clutching the handle of a frying pan he'd grabbed. Without thinking. What? How? He stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Kalen glanced up, his expression calm, but slightly amused. Good morning, he said, as if appearing uninvited in someone's kitchen was the most normal thing in the world. I trust you slept well? You're real, Daniel managed to say, lowering the frying pan slowly. You're actually here. Indeed, Kalen replied, setting the bread down. As I explained last night, our fates are intertwined. That means I must remain close to you until death separates us. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. Okay, let's back up for a second. You're telling me you're stuck with me because I touched your seal? That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense if you consider the nature of bindings, Kalen said matter-of-factly. My essence is tied to the seal which you removed. Now I exist in this realm through you. Without you, I would simply fade away. Daniel sighed, sinking into a chair at the small kitchen table. This was too much to process before breakfast. All right, fine, let's say I believe you. What exactly am I supposed to do with you now? For now, nothing, Kalen said, leaning against the counter. But we should prepare. The Veilborn will not wait long before they attempt to exploit the breach. The Veilborn, Daniel echoed, the word sending a shiver down his spine. You mentioned them last night. What are they? They are entities that dwell between dimensions, Kalen explained. Creatures of shadow and chaos drawn to instability. When the seal was intact, it kept them contained. Now that it is broken, they will seek to cross over. Daniel frowned, trying to wrap his head around the concept. So, these things, they're dangerous? Extremely, Kalen confirmed. They feed on fear and destruction. If they succeed in entering this world, it will mean catastrophe for everyone. Great, Daniel thought. Just what he needed. Cosmic monsters gunning for him because he couldn't resist picking up a shiny trinket. And what about you? He asked. Can't you just fix the seal or something? Kalen hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. It is not so simple. The seal was part of a larger system designed to maintain balance. Repairing it would require knowledge and resources I do not currently possess. Until then, we must stay vigilant, Daniel groaned, resting his forehead on the table. This whole situation felt like a bad sci-fi movie, except there was no turning it off. He was stuck playing the lead role, whether he liked it or not. Over the next few days, Daniel tried to adjust to having Kalen around. It wasn't easy. The man, or whatever he was, had an uncanny ability to irritate him. Kalen critiqued everything from his choice of coffee beans to the way he arranged items in the shop. He hovered over customers, offering unsolicited opinions about their purchases, which only made them leave faster. One elderly woman even accused Daniel of hiring a creepy actor to scare people away. This isn't working, Daniel snapped one afternoon after yet another customer stormed out. You can't just follow me around like this. People think I've lost my mind. I am merely ensuring your safety, Kalen said, unfazed. If the Veilborn send agents to find us, they will not hesitate to strike. And how exactly are they going to find us? Daniel shot back. We're in the middle of nowhere. No one knows about you except me. Kalen raised an eyebrow. Do you truly believe that? Before Daniel could respond, the bell above the shop door jingled, signaling a new arrival. Both men turned to see two strangers step inside, a man and a woman dressed in dark suits. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the room methodically. Something about them set Daniel on edge, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Stay here, Kalen murmured, stepping back into the shadows. Daniel forced a smile as the pair approached the counter. Can I help you folks? We're looking for something, the man said, his voice low and clipped. An artifact, golden, circular. Have you seen it? Daniel's heart skipped a beat. How did they know? Sorry, can't say I have. He lied, hoping his voice didn't betray him. The woman narrowed her eyes, studying him intently. Are you sure? It's very important. I'm sure, Daniel said quickly. Now, if you don't mind, I've got work to do. The man exchanged a glance with the woman before nodding curtly. We'll be watching, he said, his tone carrying a veiled threat. Then they turned and left, leaving Daniel shaken. Once the coast was clear, Kalen reappeared, his expression grim. They are agents of the Veilborn, he said. They know the seal has been disturbed? Agents? Daniel repeated, his stomach sinking. You mean those people work for them? In a manner of speaking, Kalen replied. They serve the same purpose, to eliminate threats and secure the breach, which means they will come for you again. Daniel sank onto a nearby stool, running a hand through his hair. This was getting worse by the minute. First, a mysterious prince bound to him for life. Now, shadowy operatives hunting him down. What had he gotten himself into? We need answers, he said finally, determination replacing his fear. If we're going to fix this mess, we need to figure out where the seal came from and how to stop these things from coming after us. Kalen nodded. Agreed, but tread carefully, Daniel. The truth may be more dangerous than you imagine. For the first time since meeting Kalen, Daniel felt a flicker of resolve. Maybe he didn't understand everything yet, but one thing was clear. Sitting around waiting for trouble wasn't going to solve anything. If he wanted his old life back, if he wanted to survive, he would have to face whatever was coming head on. And maybe, just maybe, Kalen wouldn't be such a bad ally after all. Daniel spent the next several days poring over every book and document he could find. He scoured his own collection of old texts, borrowed volumes from the local library, and even ordered obscure manuscripts online. Kalen watched him intently, occasionally offering suggestions or pointing out passages that might hold clues. Despite their earlier clashes, they began to settle into a rhythm of sorts. Daniel would read aloud while Kalen listened, his sharp mind piecing together fragments of information faster than Daniel could process them. Their research led them to legends about a forgotten civilization known as the Etherians. According to the stories, the Etherians had been guardians of the boundaries between worlds, tasked with keeping dangerous entities called the Veilborn at bay. These beings were described as shapeless shadows capable of slipping through cracks in reality, feeding on chaos and fear wherever they went. To combat this threat, the Etherians created powerful artifacts, seals imbued with magic, that acted as barriers to contain the Veilborn. Kalen confirmed much of what they discovered, though he admitted there were gaps in his memory. Centuries of being trapped within the seal had dulled some of his recollections. Still, he remembered enough to know that the seals weren't just tools. They were anchors for the Guardians themselves. Each seal housed a fragment of its Guardian's essence, binding them to their duty until the task was complete, or until someone like Daniel came along and disrupted everything. As they dug deeper, strange things started happening around Maplewood. Streetlights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on empty sidewalks. Mirrors in the antique shop reflected distorted images, making it seem as though people were standing where no one actually was. At night, Daniel swore he heard whispers drifting through the walls, voices speaking in languages he couldn't understand. Kalen warned him not to investigate these phenomena alone, but Daniel often brushed off the advice. After all, how dangerous could a flickering light really be? One evening, Daniel decided to visit an abandoned library on the outskirts of town. The building had been closed for decades, its shelves gathering dust and cobwebs, but rumors claimed it held forbidden knowledge hidden away by scholars long gone. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, Daniel convinced Kalen to join him under the pretense of finding answers. Truthfully, he just wanted to prove to himself, and maybe to Kalen, that he wasn't completely helpless. The library was a crumbling relic of another era, its grand architecture overtaken by decay. Shattered windows let in cold drafts, and the floorboards groaned underfoot as they ventured deeper inside. Daniel's flashlight beam danced across rows of rotting books, illuminating titles written in faded ink. It didn't take long for them to realize they weren't alone. At first, it was subtle, a faint rustling sound like pages turning somewhere far away. Then came the temperature drop, so sudden and severe that Daniel's breath formed clouds in the air. Kalen tensed beside him, his glowing eyes scanning the darkness. "We are not alone," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Before Daniel could respond, the room erupted into chaos. Shadows peeled away from the walls, twisting and writhing until they coalesced into a single, monstrous form. The creature loomed over them, its body composed of writhing black tendrils tipped with claws. Its face, if it could even be called, that was a swirling void with two burning red eyes staring out from the abyss. It let out a guttural hiss, the sound reverberating through the library like thunder. "Stay behind me," Kalen commanded, stepping forward without hesitation. As he moved, light began to emanate from his hands, forming ethereal blades that hummed with energy. Daniel stumbled backward, clutching his flashlight like it might somehow protect him. He had seen Kalen act confident before, but this was different. This was raw power, unleashed without restraint. The creature lunged, its tendrils slicing through the air with unnatural speed. Kalen met it head-on, his blades clashing against the shadowy limbs with bursts of golden sparks. The battle was fierce and chaotic, filling the library with flashes of light and deafening roars. Daniel pressed himself against a bookshelf, watching in awe and terror as Kalen fought with precision and skill. For a moment, it seemed like they might actually win, but then the creature shifted tactics. With a wave of its tendrils, it sent a shockwave rippling through the room, knocking both men off their feet. Daniel hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. Kalen recovered quickly, but the effort showed on his face. His movements were slower now, his breathing labored. Whatever energy he was using to fight was clearly taking a toll. "Daniel," Kalen shouted, glancing over his shoulder. "The seal! Use the seal!" It took a second for Daniel to understand what he meant. Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out the golden artifact, which had grown warm to the touch. Without thinking, he held it up toward the creature, shouting, "Leave us alone!" The reaction was immediate. The seal flared with blinding light, forcing the creature to retreat. Its tendrils recoiled as if burned, and it let out a piercing shriek before dissolving into nothingness. The room fell silent save for the sound of Daniel's ragged breathing. Kalen approached him cautiously, his expression unreadable. "That was reckless," he said finally, "but effective." Daniel stared at the seal in his hand, his heart still racing. "What just happened?" "You tapped into its power," Kalen explained. "The seal responds to intent. Your will to protect yourself amplified its strength." "But why didn't you tell me it could do that?" Daniel demanded, anger creeping into his voice. "Because I wasn't sure it would work," Kalen admitted. "And because wielding such power comes with risks. If you hadn't succeeded—" He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Daniel swallowed hard, realizing how close they had come to disaster. They had survived this encounter, but it was clear the Veilborn wouldn't stop coming. Not unless they found a way to repair the seal, and fast. On the drive back to Maplewood, neither of them spoke much. Daniel kept replaying the battle in his mind, wondering if he'd made the right choice. Kalen, for his part, seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. When they finally arrived home, Daniel turned to him with a determined look. "We need to figure this out," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Kalen nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Then we start tomorrow. Together." The days that followed the encounter at the abandoned library marked a turning point for Daniel and Kalen. What had started as reluctant cooperation began to shift into something deeper, a fragile but growing trust. They spent hours together, in Daniel's workshop, piecing together fragments of knowledge about the Etherians and their ancient magic. Kalen shared stories from his past life, recounting tales of his people's battles against the Veilborn. He spoke of grand temples where guardians trained under the watchful eyes of elders, of rituals that bound them to their seals, and of sacrifices made to protect countless worlds. For Daniel, these stories were both fascinating and humbling. It was hard not to feel small when faced with the weight of such history. Yet, as strange as it seemed, he found himself connecting with Kalen on a personal level. Beneath the prince's stoic exterior lay a man burdened by centuries of duty and loss. In turn, Daniel opened up about his own struggles, his strained relationship with his father, who had always disapproved of his choice to run an antique shop instead of pursuing a real career. He talked about how lonely he often felt, despite being surrounded by people. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel judged. If anything, Kalen listened with genuine interest, offering quiet wisdom without pretense. Their bond deepened, further during moments of levity. One afternoon, while attempting to decipher an old text written in a language neither of them fully understood, Daniel accidentally mispronounced a word, causing Kalen to burst into laughter. The sound was unexpected and refreshing, breaking the tension that had lingered between them since their journey began. From then on, they allowed themselves brief respites from their grim mission, sharing meals or debating over trivial topics like which era had better architecture. These small interactions reminded Daniel that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was still room for humanity, and maybe even friendship. However, their newfound camaraderie did little to shield them from the growing threat outside. The agents Kalen referred to as servants of the Veilborn became bolder, appearing in Maplewood more frequently. At first, they kept their distance, observing silently from parked cars or shadowy alleyways. But soon their presence grew menacing. Windows in Daniel's shop were shattered overnight. Strange symbols appeared spray-painted on the walls of nearby buildings. Customers stopped coming altogether, leaving Daniel's business struggling to stay afloat. One evening, as Daniel locked up the shop, he noticed two figures standing across the street. Their dark suits made them easy to spot, even in the dim light of the setting sun. When they saw him looking, one of them raised a hand, pointing directly at him before disappearing into the shadows. Daniel's stomach churned. He hurried inside, bolting the door behind him. "They're getting closer," he said to Kalen, who was already waiting in the workshop. "What do we do?" Kalen's expression was grim. "We cannot stay here much longer. They will come for us eventually." "So what, we just run?" Daniel asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Where would we even go?" "To somewhere safe," Kalen replied. Somewhere we can focus on repairing the seal without interference. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. And where is this magical safe place supposed to be? Kalen hesitated, then spoke carefully. There are traces of my people's energy scattered across the world, places where their magic still lingers. I sense one such location in the countryside, not far from here. It may hold answers. Though skeptical, Daniel nodded. They had no other options. That night they packed essentials, clothes, food, tools, and the golden seal, and left Maplewood behind. Driving through winding roads under the cover of darkness, Daniel couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This town had been his home for years, and now he was abandoning it to forces beyond his control. Still, he reminded himself that staying would only put others in danger. Sometimes, sacrifice was necessary. When they reached the countryside, dawn was breaking over rolling hills blanketed in mist. The air smelled cleaner here, free of the city's grime and noise. Following Kalen's directions, they parked near the edge of a dense forest and began hiking deeper into the woods. After nearly an hour of walking, they stumbled upon the ruins of an ancient temple. Crumbling stone columns rose from the earth like skeletal fingers, their surfaces covered in moss and ivy. Faint carvings adorned the remaining walls depicting scenes of guardians battling shadowy creatures. "This is it," Kalen said softly, his voice tinged with awe. "This place holds echoes of my people's power." Daniel looked around, taking in the eerie beauty of the sight. "How do we use it?" "We must perform a ritual," Kalen explained. "It will amplify the seal's energy, allowing us to locate the missing pieces needed to restore it." As they worked to prepare the ritual, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent his heart racing. Kalen reassured him that the forest was likely teeming with wildlife, but Daniel wasn't convinced. His instincts told him danger was near, and sure enough, it wasn't long before it arrived. Just as Kalen activated the ritual, chanting words in a language Daniel didn't understand, the ground began to tremble. Shadows spilled out from between the trees, coalescing into multiple forms. Dozens of veil-born emissaries surrounded them, their red eyes glowing with malice. Kalen immediately stepped forward, summoning his ethereal blades once again. "Protect the seal," he shouted to Daniel, who scrambled to grab it. The battle that ensued was chaotic and brutal. Kalen fought valiantly, cutting down one creature after another, but their numbers were overwhelming. Each strike drained more of his strength, leaving him visibly weakened. Daniel, clutching the seal tightly, tried to think of a way to help. Remembering what had happened at the library, he focused all his willpower on the artifact, willing it to respond. The seal erupted in a brilliant flash of light, driving back the Veilborn momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, Kalen channeled the surge of energy into the ritual, completing it just as the creatures regrouped. A wave of golden energy swept outward, banishing the Veilborn and restoring a measure of stability to the fractured dimensions. Exhausted, Kalen collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, rushing to his side. Kalen nodded weakly. "The seal. It is repaired. For now. But what about you?" Daniel pressed, noticing how pale and frail Kalen looked. "What happened?" "The ritual drained much of my essence," Kalen admitted. "Without the seal anchoring me, I am mortal now." Daniel's chest tightened. Mortal. The word carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. Despite everything, he realized he didn't want to lose Kalen, not after everything they'd been through. "Then we'll figure this out together," he said firmly. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." Kalen managed a faint smile, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Together, they walked away from the ruins, ready to forge a new path, one bound not by obligation, but by choice. The days following the ritual in the forest were quiet, almost unnervingly so. Daniel and Kalen found temporary shelter in a small cabin nestled deep within the woods. It was rustic but sturdy, with a wood-burning stove and enough supplies to last them for a while. For the first time since their journey began, they felt a sense of calm, though it was fragile, like thin ice over a frozen lake. Neither of them spoke much about what came next, but both knew the reprieve wouldn't last forever. Kalen spent most of his time resting, his body still adjusting to its newfound mortality. The toll of the ritual had left him weaker than he cared to admit, and Daniel noticed subtle changes in him. His once sharp movements were slower now, his glowing eyes dimmer. He no longer radiated the same commanding presence that had initially intimidated Daniel. Instead, there was a vulnerability to him, an openness that made him seem more human. Daniel did his best to help. He cooked meals, gathered firewood, and kept the cabin tidy, all while keeping an eye on Kalen's condition. Though he wasn't used to taking care of anyone but himself, he found comfort in having someone to look after. It gave him purpose, something tangible to focus on amid the chaos of their situation. At night they sat by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Kalen shared more stories of his past life, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and failures. Daniel listened intently, realizing how little he truly understood about sacrifice and duty until now. But even as they grew closer, questions lingered between them. What would happen if the Veilborn returned? Could the repaired seal hold indefinitely, or was it only a temporary fix? And perhaps most importantly, what did the future hold for Kalen now that he was mortal? One evening, as they sat by the fire, Daniel finally voiced the thoughts that had been weighing on his mind. "What happens to you now?" he asked, poking at the embers with a stick. "I mean, if you're mortal, does that mean you'll age like the rest of us?" Kalen glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. "It seems likely," he said after a pause. "My essence is tied to this realm now. I will live and die as any human would." "And what about when you're gone?" Daniel pressed, his voice softer this time. "Will you disappear completely?" Kalen shook his head. "I do not know. Perhaps my spirit will return to the cycle of existence as all things do, or perhaps I will simply fade into memory." Daniel frowned, staring into the flames. "That doesn't seem fair. After everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed." "Fairness has little to do with it," Kalen interrupted, gently. "Life is fleeting, Daniel. Mortality makes it precious. That is something I have come to appreciate because of you." The words caught Daniel off guard. He looked up, meeting Kalen's gaze, and saw sincerity in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The crackling fire filled the silence, casting flickering shadows across the walls. A few days later, their peace was shattered. As dawn broke over the horizon, a loud crash echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable sound of snapping branches. Daniel bolted upright, his heart pounding. Kalen was already on his feet, gripping one of the makeshift weapons they had prepared during their travels. "They've found us," Kalen said grimly. Outside, the air was thick with tension. The trees swayed unnaturally, their leaves rustling, despite the absence of wind. Dark shapes moved among the shadows, converging on the cabin. This time, the Veilborn weren't sending mere emissaries. They had brought something larger, something far more menacing. A towering figure emerged from the tree line, its form shifting and writhing like smoke given shape. Its eyes burned brighter than before, twin orbs of crimson fury that seemed to pierce through the morning mist. "We can't fight that," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. "We don't have to," Kalen replied, stepping forward. "Not alone." Before Daniel could protest, Kalen raised his hands, calling upon the last reserves of his strength. Light surged from his fingertips, forming a barrier around the cabin. The Veilborn roared, slamming against the shimmering shield, but it held firm, for now. "Take the seal," Kalen instructed, his voice strained. "Use it to channel your will. Together we can banish it." Daniel hesitated, clutching the golden artifact tightly. He had used it before, but never under such dire circumstances. What if he failed? What if his fear got the better of him? But looking at Kalen, who was visibly struggling to maintain the barrier, he pushed those doubts aside. There was no room for hesitation. Focusing all his energy, Daniel held the seal aloft and shouted, "Leave us alone!" The seal responded instantly, erupting in a cascade of golden light. The beam struck the Veilborn directly, forcing it to retreat. Its form wavered, dissolving into wisps of shadow before vanishing entirely. The forest fell silent once more, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. When Daniel turned back to Kalen, he saw that the prince had collapsed, his strength utterly spent. Rushing to his side, Daniel helped him sit up, concern etched across his face. "Are you okay?" Kalen nodded weakly, managing a faint smile. "We did it." For a long moment, they simply sat there, catching their breath. The battle had drained them both, but they had survived, again. Slowly, Daniel realized that their connection went beyond the bond forged by the seal. They had become partners, in every sense of the word, relying on each other not just for survival, but for hope. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel and Kalen continued their journey together. They traveled to distant places, seeking answers and preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. Along the way, they faced new dangers, uncovered hidden truths, and learned more about themselves and each other than they ever thought possible. Though the threat of the Veilborn still loomed, Daniel no longer feared it as he once had. With Kalen by his side, he felt ready to face anything. Their bond, once born of obligation, had transformed into something deeper, a friendship built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. Whether they succeeded or failed, they would do so together. And so their story continued, not as master and servant, nor as reluctant allies, but as equals bound by choice rather than fate. Whatever the future held, they would meet it head-on, proving that even the unlikeliest of bonds could withstand the test of time and death.